Good afternoon and welcome to my breakout session. I'm so excited all of you are here. As Allison stated, I'm Dr. Angela Love. I obtained my DBA or Doctor in Business Administration in Finance from Walden in November of 2019. I can't believe it's almost 2 years since I've earned my doctorate. I had an amazing experience at Walden, and I think it's just super great that they offer opportunities like this. So for just for students who are working on their doctorates, and then for those alumni, and then for also for teachers or faculty rather, who just have an opportunity to share about their studies, what they're currently working on, or maybe what they're proposing for a study that they're currently working on to hopefully get published. Going right into my study was on the strategies to reduce employee stress to enhance productivity in credit unions. Next slide, please. So in my study, and I just want to go ahead and apologize ahead of time, we have super wind, just a lot of wind here, and so it does get kind of loud. I've had some chairs and stuff banging up against my wall, so if you do hear some background noise, that's what that is. I don't have any control over that, but in the northeast part of Texas today, we're just having kind of a windstorm, so I just want to let you know about that, just in case you hear some background noise. Anyway, jumping back into my study, my problem statement, my general problem was basically that some supervisors in the retail and commercial departments of credit unions were being negatively influenced or affected by employee stress. That employee stress resulted in reduced work performance and negative work outcomes, and it also increased costs for the credit unions. The specific business problems is that some credit union leaders lacked the understanding or knowledge to how to deal with that employee stress. The purpose of my multiple case study was to explore those strategies that credit union leaders had that they were using successfully to reduce employee stress. I interviewed 11 different credit union business leaders and 8 different credit unions in the Midwest and the Western regions of the United States. And those participants had implemented successful strategies to reduce employee stress. The framework that I used for my study was the jobs resource demands resources theory. I refer to it as the JDR theory. It was developed by Baker and Demiralty. Back in 2001, they created a job demands resource model based on burnout, which was based on the theory of burnout. And then in 2007, they updated that to just the jobs demands resource model. And then it slowly developed into a theory. And they just have been progressively working on that. And it's my understanding that the theory has remained the same since 2017. The significance of my study is that business leaders will be able to provide successful strategies to reduce employee stress, not only in credit unions, but in other industries. And by reducing that employee stress, they will increase job performance or work performance, and ultimately reduce their costs for their businesses related to employee stress. Next slide, please. Here is a diagram of the job or the JDR, job demands resource theory that Baker and Demiralty ended up with. This is the last one that I had found at the time that I did my study, as far as the model that they created, or the diagram rather. So basically, if you start at the bottom, it's just showing job demands. And so job demands basically is mental demands, physical demands, emotional demands, and then a category that they actually called etc. And that had to do with personal demands or demands in an employee's personal life. And those job demands, like physical, it could be that maybe the employee has physical issues, or maybe they didn't have like a chair that worked for them, or maybe the way that their desk was set up was causing them strain, like with in their neck or their back or those types of issues. And so that's kind of what physical demands are. Or you have some employees that do a lot of lifting, or for like credit union tellers who are on their feet all day, that's a physical demand. Some of them would have, leg cramps or issues with their feet and that sort of thing. Other job demands fall into the mental category, which that has to do with work expectations. So some employees don't understand the work expectations that their supervisors have for them. The supervisors don't present that in a clear way for a particular employee or set of employees. It's other job demands have to do with the emotional, and that has to do with interpersonal relationships, and that can carry over into their personal lives. So employee may have personal demands in the emotional area where they're struggling with just relationships with family members or friends, and then that sometimes will carry over, or they may have emotional demands at work where they're struggling with that as well. Work conditions can also be an emotional demand. Maybe the culture isn't the best, or it's not a culture that is ideal for an employee, so that can become an emotional demand. And the other demand is etc., which is just, like I said, is personal. It has to do with personal issues. It could be their personal finances. It could be their relationship with a spouse. It could be issues with their children. Maybe it's a health issue that they're struggling with. As you know, there's just a lot of different types of personal demands that a person can experience. As you go up or back into the job demands, I apologize. Those job demands, when they're not taken care of or they're not mitigated, can increase employee stress or strain. And some employees will actually do what's called self-undermining. So they'll sabotage their work. They'll sabotage what they do in their work. And as a result of that stress that they're experiencing. When credit union leaders or business leaders provide job resources or personal resources to mitigate those job demands, they see an increase in motivation by employees, which increases job performance. They've even seen that some employees will engage in what's called job crafting. Job crafting is basically when an employee will take ownership for their position and for the tasks that they have to do, and they will create ways to complete those tasks by create different ways to make it more efficient to get that done. And that's called job crafting. So those employees actually go one step further or a few steps further than their supervisor asked them on how to do their job. And so they found that when job demands are mitigated by job and personal resources, that it actually increases work outcomes or job performance, positive work outcomes. Next slide, please. My research question was, what strategies do some credit union leaders use to reduce employee stress to enhance productivity? The procedures I used in my study was semi-structured interviews using predetermined questions and company documents. I then took those interviews that I did, that I had with those participants, and I transcribed them. And once I transcribed them, I validated them through member checking. And then I used in vivo 12 to organize and manage and store the collected data. And then when I went to analyze the data, I used methodology, triangulation. I used the in vivo 12 to detect the key patterns by, looking at the phrases or the information that was most common to develop my themes using inductive thematic analysis. And as I stated earlier, I had 11 credit union leaders that I interviewed. I actually had a 12th participant, but they weren't a credit union leader. They were entry-level employee. And so I did go ahead and interview them because I didn't want to make them feel bad, but I did have to disqualify their interview and any information that they provided, since they weren't a business leader who had successful strategies to reduce employee stress, to increase productivity. And as I mentioned, my credit unions were in the Midwest and the Western US. And with those credit unions, I actually had more credit unions that were willing to participate, but I did reach data saturation in my interviews. So I didn't have to use any more participants, but I did have more participants that were interested. So they were kind of put on hold until I interviewed those 11. And then once I started just getting the same information over and over from those business leaders, I realized that I didn't need to interview any more business leaders or any more participants for my study. Next slide, please. What I found from the participants is that those that offer job and personal resources, they really worked at doing a feedback-friendly work environment. And what that really entailed was that they had open communication, both directions or bi-directional with employees and leaders. So employees felt comfortable enough that they could go to their supervisors and be able to share what was going on, what they're struggling with, what the successes they were having in their job. And at the same time, the supervisors or the business leaders were very intentional in making sure that they not only offered like constructive feedback to the employees, but positive feedback to the employees. So they really wanted to make sure that the feedback was friendly, that it wasn't always this, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. They wanted it to be this open communication where they were providing positive feedback, and also, along with the constructive feedback on how to improve things. And they felt that that really helped motivate employees. Another approach that a lot of the credit unions did was a holistic approach to well-being, meaning that they really strive to offer job resources and personal resources that encompassed physical needs and mental and emotional needs. One credit union shared that they lived in a small community and they didn't have public transportation. And so what they did is they went out and they got together with other businesses in the community and they started a network of business solutions. And those companies all were having the same problem, which was getting employees to get to work. There was a lack of transportation available for employees. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have an automobile, and there wasn't public transportation. And so what those businesses did is they came together and they used a people mover. I don't know if they rented it or if one of the organizations, companies in the community had one, but they used one of those larger people mover type vans. And they went and they would go to designated spots and they would pick up employees for all the different companies in the community that were participating. And they would pick up those employees and then they would take them and drop them off at their work locations. And then at the end of the workday, they would go and pick up those employees and then they would drop them back off at those designated spots so the employees could get home. And what they saw from that was they saw an increase in employees that were going to work. They saw a decrease in absenteeism. The employee loyalty went way up. And so they saw an increase in productivity, which also lowered costs for the companies because they were able to provide the demand. They were able to provide the services that they needed to provide. They were able to provide the products that they needed to provide. And so they just saw an uptick in productivity, and it also just carried over that employees were motivated. They were excited because they were able to go to work and they were able to earn an income and they were excited about their job. And so that's just one small example of providing like a personal resource. It wasn't, those companies didn't need to do that. Transportation is usually the responsibility of the employee, but these companies really needed their employees to be there. They needed employees to show up. They needed their retention to increase because they were having employees quit because they couldn't make it to work or they were being terminated and because they weren't showing up for work. And so all these businesses got together, and that was one thing that they were able to provide was as a personal resource. Other examples of personal resources is, or job and personal resources is one credit union. They actually offered what's called hoteling. And so those employees, they had a workstation, like a cubicle or an office, but everyone had a laptop and they were able to move throughout the facility to be able to do their work. And so they could go to the coffee bar and there was an area there where they could work, or they could go outside and they can work, and they can move to a different cubicle if they wanted to, just for the day. It wasn't like they were moving their whole office. They had a designated spot, but they could just lift up their laptop and go to where they needed to go. If they were just having a hard day and, or just needed a change of scenery. That also facilitated collaboration among employees that were working on projects together, or maybe they just worked in the same area done. They just needed to work on something or make something more efficient. And so that increased productivity in that way. Other employees, other credit unions, what they found is they provided, like one credit union provided a nurse that came in for a half day on, I believe it was Mondays. And that nurse was just there. That nurse started a nutrition program, a weight loss program. And then the nurse was just there to answer questions. You know, sometimes as employees, we go to work and we have a headache, that sort of thing, or we just have something that doesn't feel quite right. And so they shared that that was the reason why they had the nurse. And they found in that particular credit union that the employees started to change in how they were eating. As an example, credit unions, along with a lot of companies, you know, they have a lot of food carry-in for birthdays or holidays or different events or whatnot. And they stated that before they started that program, having the nurse come in and doing these different things for physical and mental health, that the employees would bring in like cakes and cookies and chips and all the things that we love, but that are not necessarily healthy for us. And employees slowly started to change, and they started bringing in like fruits and vegetables and healthier food items. And so that was just something that was organic out of that out of that experience. And so the employees wanted to make, you know, better choices because of having that nurse that was encouraging them to make better choices, like with food. And there's just a lot of, and I could probably go on for a couple of hours of all the different job and personal resources that the credit unions provided for their employees. But one credit union, what they did is they wanted to have it more measurable. They went to their board and said, we want to offer these job resources and personal resources. And the board of directors was like, you know, that's going to cost a lot. You know, we really want to see, you know, that we're getting our money back on that. So one credit union, they went in and they looked at metrics for health insurance costs, and they actually saw a decrease in health insurance costs because employees were not getting sick as often. So that was one measurable mark. Even though my study was qualitative, that credit union was using quantitative data to support that job resources needed to be provided to employees to reduce the employee stress, to increase the work productivity. Another finding was that company culture was becoming more positive, and they found the business leaders, and I think all of them talked about this, that when the company culture, when they shifted from kind of a negative company culture to a more positive company culture and dealt with some of the issues that were going on. And they got these, they designated certain business leaders to be kind of cheerleaders to get other employees, you know, involved and going to events and getting involved in the community and the different types of things. They saw that the company culture changed and became more positive, and that reduced employee stress. Employees were able to make personal connections with other coworkers, and they were more excited about being at work, and that increased productivity and performance. Another finding was that, as I mentioned, is that employee outcomes, the work outcomes were higher. There was better relationships between coworkers. They started seeing that sales were going, not sales, but interactions with members of the credit unions was going up. They were seeing increase in their gross receipts or revenues, if you will. And so they were seeing a positive trend. They were seeing that they were more positive in the community as well. Next slide, please. The themes that I've already mentioned, those that came out of the data analysis, were the feedback-friendly work environment, the holistic approach to well-being, the positive company culture, and the positive employee outcomes. The delimitations of my study was that I specifically used credit unions, leaders in the Midwestern and Western regions of the United States. I was going to expand if I didn't get the numbers that I needed to do my study, or I didn't reach data saturation. I would have expanded further out. And as I said, I had a list of credit unions that participants that were wanting to be, they're kind of like on a waiting list to see if I had reached data saturation, and I did. So if I were to go back and do like a follow-up or another study, just kind of building on it, I know that there's credit union leaders out there that would be willing to go ahead and give me more information or additional information on their experiences. The limitations in my study was that, credit unions leaders, I don't know if they shared everything that they had, and that's not something that I can control. And but I feel like that most of them were pretty open, and so I think I overcame that. Some of them were a little bit hesitant because they didn't want their information to get out, and so I just reassured them that none of identifiable information was going to be used, and that really helped them to be excited about the study. The recommendations is that credit unions leaders, as long as business leaders in other industries, if they use an approach with personal and job resources to mitigate job demands, they will see reduction, or they should see reduction in employee stress, and they should begin to see an increase in motivation and positive work outcomes, such as a decrease in absenteeism, a decrease in presenteeism, which is basically when employees are present, but they're not really working. They're not engaging in their work. They should see an increase in job crafting. They should see an increase in retention and a decrease in employees that are quitting. They should also see an increase in just employee loyalty as well. And then all of that, they should see a decrease in company costs in certain areas. And then they should see an increase in revenues and an increase in their bottom line. The social change implications is that when employees are less stressed out, and I know it's hard today with COVID, and as a person said to me yesterday, is everybody is on the struggle train right now. Everybody seems to be struggling in one way or another. And but with reducing employee stress by mitigating job and personal demands, business leaders should see an increase in a positive company culture, an increase in community involvement. Credit unions, not all industries and not all companies, but credit unions are really focused on getting involved in the community. And so that's what my study was based on. And that's what I found, is that business leaders can, by doing this, there's a higher probability that people will want to turn around and give back. And then there's just improved stress in society as a whole. So if we're less stressed at work, then hopefully we're less stressed at home. If, our jobs are helping mitigate some of those personal stressors that we have. And then because of that, then we can turn around and, help others by providing them with some of the resources that we are being given through our jobs, or like give ideas and that sort of thing to reduce stress overall. Next slide, please. I think those are my references. And then the next slide is, I'm a little bit ahead of time, but I'm open for questions